Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to House of Footy. It's your boy Ray, and tonight I've got Mac with me. Welcome, Mac.
Good evening.
Tonight we're going to be going over the final leg of the Champions League semifinals, as well as we'll preview the upcoming Premier League games. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on our social media, both on X and Instagram. Our handle is at House_Footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, feel free to get in touch with us via email. We love hearing from you guys. And we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. All right, Mac, let's go straight into the action. First match we're going to talk about, of course, the match that just finished a couple hours ago, actually, day of recording, Real Madrid against Bayern. Now, this one, we were kind of leaning towards the team that won eventually, Real Madrid winning 2-1 on the night, but kind of played out differently, I think, than most people would have expected. Madrid, I think, had more in terms of the possession, definitely to start off with, but then we're kind of hit on counter themselves, which was kind of weird to see in a Champions League knockout match, Madrid coming from behind through a counterattack. Of course, though, Real Madrid go on to get two very, very late goals, and they go on to make it through to the finals. But Mac, what were your overall takes on this result?
I thought this game played out much like how I talked about in our preview podcast, where I assumed just as Real Madrid were playing in a similar style when they play away at Bayern Munich was very much trying to do something similar type of game plan, where comfortable out of possession, sit back in a low block, try to be able to beat a team in transitional moments. And in some ways, it kind of felt like, even though I would argue that there isn't as much of a quality disparity between these two teams, Bayern tried to do what Real Madrid did to Man City in a lot of ways. It was very much a similar type of game plan where, okay, we are going to start two pacey wingers, Serge Gnabry and Leroy Sané on either side of Musiala and Kane. And in those moments, we are going to be able to try to get at Real Madrid when Carvajal's on too deep on the overlap and there isn't as much cover at the back. And I would argue, to Bayern's credit, in just a few moments, it looked like that template worked well. I feel like there was a couple flaws in it. Primarily, they didn't do good enough job, I would argue, in getting the ball to Jamal Musiala, who, while he was on the pitch, I think he only had just over 20 touches. Or taking a look at a comparison to, let's say, a Toni Kroos in the first half alone, I think he played 73 out of 76 passes correctly. So it's just the disparity difference where, even though, yes, he didn't get as much of the ball, Musiala, in terms of their game plan was, okay, let's give it to him or give it to Kane and see if we can hit out wide. And you notice that on the onset, once Thomas Muller was not part of the starting lineup and probably one of the more heralded Bayern Munich players, as well as soon as Serge Gnabry came on, it wasn't he who came on. It was the eventual goal scorer for Bayern Munich, Alphonso Davies, who himself can be viewed as a pacey winger. So you saw that game plan from Bayern. It made a lot of sense. And up until the 88th minute, it looked like it was working well. So very much in terms of how the game mapped out, it very much was what I anticipated and what I expected. I think the main difference, and we'll kind of go through maybe goal by goal or controversial by controversial moment, but what surprised me was those controversial moments, which I did not see coming because they were hectic and chaotic in all different types of ways. I don't know if you want to start there or you want to start with the positives in terms of the initial goals, because I think all individually, each of them were phenomenal in their own right.
Right.
Where do you want to start? What do you want to start with?
For sure. I'll quickly go over the goals as well, because we need to highlight just how good Alphonso Davies' goal was. Coming on in such a big match as a sub, playing in what a lot of people would argue his best role, more of an attacking wing player. Yeah, definitely an attacking player, doing what he does best and taking it with his weak foot. And that kind of reminds me of Rodri's goal, I think, in last year's semifinal against Bayern as well, where he uses his weak foot and hits a fantastic shot to beat the keeper. Very similar comparison there, and I thought that's it. That's the way you kind of have to hit Madrid. Ultimately, I mean, I know we're gonna get into controversial moments, but I want to quickly go over the two goals for Madrid. Of course, we have to
just want to jump in there before you jump on the grid. Want to be able to talk about the Alphonso Davies goal as well. I think, and even the phenomenal Rudiger, he did the right thing. I would argue, showing him onto his weak foot. I do though want to, I mean, maybe it's my haterade, but I do want to throw a lot of blame onto Carvajal. If you watch back on that goal, he gets sucked into the middle and completely ignores Alphonso Davies. So great credit to him, but I feel like there was a lot of mistakes. And even when Bayern did get on the counter, it wasn't as if everything was clean and cut through easily where, okay, it made A, B, C, D, E pass correctly to get in those transitional moments. Very much was a consistent mistakes from Madrid, which allowed them in it. Another one that came to mind is off a corner, Mueller going to Davies and then tries to be able to play through Pavlovic on a break. But again, 2 missed passes didn't go through. So there was mistakes there on either side, but still, I completely agree with you. Great credit, great strike, great finish.
And on that note as well, Davies doing what you could argue Grealish was unable to do, and that's expose Carvajal with pace. I think even a couple plays before that, Davies was through, and it gave flashbacks again, Champions League flashbacks to Bale against Maicon, where you know how you have a fast-paced winger coming across likely a player, a defender who's past his prime, trying to catch up. So great credit to that, because as well, Rudiger and Lunin, nothing else you could really do about that goal. So gotta shout out that. Joselu himself, crazy story. Of course, he is on loan from Espanyol, a team that is in the second division this year with Madrid. And you're thinking, at that point, we can talk about maybe the subs as well, how that impacted the game. But of course, he came on as a sub himself. 88 minutes in, Neuer, you have to put some blame on his parts, because he doesn't deal with that Vinicius shot, which I think for the most part, the keeper of that quality should be able to deal with that. But apart from Jude Bellingham, I don't see any other Real Madrid player making that run. So I have to give credit to Joselu for being attentive and, of course, chasing that goal. And then lastly, of course, his positioning to, of course, get the last one from Rudiger himself. So big shout out to Joselu. Anything on those last 2 goals, Mac?
Absolutely. You got to be able to speak to him individually. It's a fantastic story. I definitely think that if you speak to, let's say, 100 Madrid fans going into the beginning of this year, 99 would say to them is, why is our best striking option off the bench Joselu? There is something wrong. We need to fix this. And to him to be able to pull it the way that he did, absolute credit. Love his story. I think that if our call backwards, the last final that they played in, he was actually a fan wearing a Real Madrid jersey, watching their game and supporting for them to win. So it's nice to see those photos come out. So great to see kind of the growth of him as an individual to get onto this pitch. And in all likely, probably scared himself coming back next year, right? I think that's fair. I think that's fair to say. No, let's just be fair to say, if Ceballos is still on the bench, Joselu should deserve to come back next year. As simple as that. But I do want to point out Rudiger, his positioning on the second goal. Again, what we talked about, what I mentioned in the first leg, it's where the controlled chaos of Rudiger, where you're tied 1-1. You've done your job, at least to make it to extra time and figure out things from there. But Rudiger, after a set piece, to find himself in the position, left foot across the box. It was originally called offside. We'll get to that later. But just for the presence of mind to be in that position, to be aware of that moment, and still have the quality as a center half to play that across, absolutely phenomenal. And also credit to him. Again, as you pointed, other than Bellingham, those who actually, if you look back at that goal, they were right beside each other. The only 2 players trying to get into that spot for Real Madrid do the dirty work, and credit to them, and also specifically to be able to get both goals.
Okay, well, Mac, that's it for me. Let's start talking about those moments that really, Champions League moments at Real Madrid, at the Santiago Bernabeu. You kind of expect some controversial moments at the very least. So let's hit it off, Mac. Go ahead.
So how I want to phrase this is, was Madrid inevitable or lucky? Because you put in the chat, in one of our chats, is that Real Madrid was inevitable. It was bound to happen. Or were they lucky for other things? I think it's a mixture of both, because it's similar to what we always talk about with Manchester City in the Premier League, where they are just so consistent with their effort. They create kind of chances themselves, and they get fortunate in a lot of ways. I think there's 3 instances that you want to be able to drill down as major mistakes. Not major mistakes. I would argue they were 1 for 3 in those moments. Unfortunately, the 2 that they got wrong hurt Bayern. One that they actually didn't impact on the score sheet. Or if you remember early on in the first half, there was a kind of maybe a double save from Manuel Neuer. The ball goes out, but is actually never called out. Second ball comes onto the pitch. It's striked off the post. I think Vinicius gets the rebound. Neuer makes a phenomenal save. No harm done. But if you're conspiracy theorists, if you're throwing your tinfoil hat on, that's just a little sprinkling of what we can expect at the end of the game. And I think that's the moment on the other side. And I'll get your thoughts in regards to, and maybe the height parity of what's going on with Nacho and Kimmich and your thoughts on there. But the call for Muller being offside on the eventual probable tying goal, where it was blown offside before the full play was allowed to continue. So the full review of if it was offside or not was never done. And I can guarantee one thing, those lines are never being drawn by anybody. So no one will actually know the truth, because at the end of the day, there's no benefit for UEFA to release that. So I think in those individual moments to kind of map it out, ball comes in, Neuer is deemed to be offside. Eventually they go on to score, but the referee blows the whistle as the linesman puts up the flag for offside. You blame the linesman putting up the flag, referee for reacting to the linesman and not allowing the full play to continue. So again, the memes of Perez in the VAR room is very, very fair, and definitely fits. If I'm a Bayern Munich fan, I'm crushed by that. But again, those moments are going to happen in football. It's unfortunate that just the funny twist of fate is that it just always seems to be these types of teams that do get this advantage. But again, that's why, are they lucky? Yes, but at the same time, they were inevitable to be able to come back and eventually win the game. So credit to them. But I do want to be able to get your opinion on regards to the Kimmich and Nacho, or if you have thoughts on the other ones as well, where that foul, let's say Joshua Kimmich is 6'2". That push is into his chest, not into his face.
That's right.
So is it now, not to say short people privilege, I'm not trying to say that, but my point being is where is it maybe an advantage why you put a shorter person? Because think about it, Nacho's why is Kimmich covering Nacho on a corner anyway, right? But I just think that's interesting, because if you snap and take a look at all the other hand-to-hand combat that's happening in the box at the exact same moment, everybody else has hands on everybody else's body. The only difference is there is that height disparity. I don't know. I just found that funny when I'm looking that back, is where if they're the same height, that's not called. Maybe Kimmich doesn't end up on the floor, but point being is that it was, again, in Bayern's favor that ended up working out, and that was called. I do agree, though, it was a foul. But I guess about you, do you have your tinfoil hat on? I know you're coming from a Real Madrid fan perspective more so, but what are your thoughts on any of those situations?
Still a foul for me. You're making contact with the player's face, and ultimately, height or no height, you can avoid a player's face, even if it's in sort of the heat of the moment. It's something that us players can probably attest to. That's something that we don't necessarily think of. And so, of course, he's just trying to create some space, but ultimately it is a foul. That play in itself, you kind of see it more in the American football, where you're trying to, maybe before the ball snapped, players are trying to gain some ground, and ultimately I think it was the right call. It should have been given a foul, and the goal got called back. The other controversial moments, games at Madrid, you're gonna have to get used to some iffy calls, and ultimately I think you could make the case for a couple of those, especially like the Muller offside, and I think that's the one that Eric Dyer is referring to, saying the linesman's apologizing for that. Not a great look on the refereeing team and that for that itself, but I can't really say anything other than, even though Madrid are lucky to get that call go their way, it itself, I have to bring it back to how the game played out after Madrid goal down. They definitely are then forced on the front foot, and then the changes that Tuchel ultimately makes, bringing Kane and Musial off, kind of hamstring them in the fact that even if they do concede a goal, it's still just going to be pressure against you. And I mean, I would have done the same thing, but ultimately you kind of have to give it to, yes, Madrid made the most of what they could have from that situation. And also, again, the goalkeeping mistake, I think that Neuer had to even let Madrid back into the game. But those were my thoughts. Of course, any last thoughts on this game, Matt, before we move on to the second game?
I just want to say, Real Madrid better win the final, because after the game, to have your whole team line up in number 15 jersey chasing the 15, if you don't win, that is meme for the rest of your life. That's not a great look. It's given the manner that they did win with a little bit of the controversial moment. I don't know if I would have done it. I understand a lot of those players are young. Maybe the first taste of the Champions League for a lot of the younger players, or second round with a lot of, let's say, like Vinicius. Oh, this is my team versus Benzema team type of thing. That feel, I get that, but you save those jerseys for after you do win, not when you win the semifinals. So they better win, because if they don't, I'm just letting you know, if I was working for Dortmund watching this game, and we'll talk about them afterwards, I would have a great few weeks on Twitter just memeing that away. That'll be a great time. So again, all the pressure is on them after doing that. So if it doesn't go work their way and they do get egg on their face, it'll probably be a couple dozen eggs on their face.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty certain that is not the first time Madrid have done this. If I recall, previously they've done similar things when they qualify for the finals and prematurely are in the race for winning something. So it's not something that Madrid are sort of unfamiliar to, and definitely at this point are favorites to win that final. So maybe that had some to play for it. But of course, like you said, the talk, you have to back it up. And of course, you're going to have to back it up against Borussia Dortmund, who won on the night against PSG. A big surprising result, I think, to both of us, Mac, considering how our preview went. I'll toss it to you, though, Mac. What, I guess, did we learn from this game, or what stood out to you from PSG 0, Dortmund 1?
So our preview, I would argue, was spot on. We talked about exactly how PSG are going to dominate chances. They're going to dominate the ball. They had 70% possession and 30 shots. How do they not win? Easy. Depends on which viewpoint you have. If you're Luis Enrique, you said, we hit the post over 6 times. We had an expected goal of 7. They didn't. It was only 5.5, but still quite a large expected goal over the course of 2 legs. And they were just unfortunate, and they were just unlucky. So just like the reverse of Madrid in some ways, where it just didn't go in their favor. Or you could argue, in those moments, do those players really have it? Again, when Mbappe puts on a France jersey, things seem to go in his favor. As soon as he's wearing a PSG jersey in the Champions League, things don't go well for him. Could you look at it that way? Or the other players, if it be Dembele, Gonzalo Ramos, having their moments of not stepping up? Again, a lot of what we talked about, even how when we had talked about where Mbappe starts as the winger, Ramos comes to be the striker, you see a lot more Mbappe this game than you see in the first leg. Again, a lot of that we had predicted. But what we didn't predict, them not being able to finish. Again, I don't know if they've been watching a lot of Prem, watching the Nunes highlights, watching the Lucas Jackson highlights. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe the mixtapes that they're watching for pregame. I don't know, but it's not working out well. And that's why this era for PSG looks to be over. My favorite moment of the entire game was actually not from the game. It was actually in the post-match press conference when a PSG reporter asked Mbappe in tomorrow's game for Real Madrid versus Bayern, who you supported. Just as he's not asking, hey, what's the news? Where are you going this summer? Just curious, who are you supporting? And Mbappe just looks at him and doesn't respond and moves on to the next question. So absolute peak from the reporter. He deserves a raise. But going back to the game, I apologize. I think, though, again, what we talked about, a lot of that happened, but just Dortmund's ability to survive. Again, they had a lot of luck go their way. They had a lot of things to be able to go in their favor to be able to come out with this result over 2 legs and not concede a goal. But their ability just to adapt, survive, make that extra block, make that extra tackle, and at the same time, not just come out of the time, win the game. Scoring a goal off a corner through Matt Hummels, you could argue one of their, even though he did have a stint with Bayern Munich, and I think he won a Champions League with them as well. He's very much their last, I would say, other than Marco Reus, their last starting 11 player, who's from that Jurgen Klopp initial era when Dortmund first came up, and everyone was talking to them about one of the young aspiring team. So to have that come full circle and with this type of performance, absolutely love to see. What about you? What are your initial thoughts or takeaways from this game?
So, of course, you covered a lot of what I would have said as well. It came down to this. And this really encapsulates how both teams kind of work for each other in these scenarios, where there's an offensive corner for Dortmund. They have the corner gets swung in. I think it gets cleared out. I think it's Mbappe or Dembele who are on the break, maybe even Fabian Ruiz. And as soon as PSG crossed the halfway line on a break, you see 7-8 Dortmund players running back. And that's very much I have to bring it back to how Arsenal have been so good defensively in transition to not allow the other team to score. in 2 matches against Dortmund, PSG are not able to score a single goal. That's a huge testament to how well Dortmund defended as a team and individually as well. Adeyemi and Jadon Sancho are not going to get enough praise, but of course they did well enough to double on the likes of Mbappe and Dembele and even support when Hakimi and Mendes are coming forward. And on the flip side, you don't expect that really from PSG, where the ball goes to Dembele or Mbappe on the wings. You don't really see someone making a run into the box to expect to cross in, not necessarily saying that they would cross the ball in, because they of course like to do the little plays, maybe do the 1-2s and open up defenses that way. But you have to switch it up that way. And especially if it didn't work for you in the first game. I understand Gonzalo Ramos did start this game, but unfortunately for him, didn't have the effect I think Luis Enrique would have expected. And yeah, PSG unfortunately were not able to get the goals at all, even though they had a couple of chances. Even Vitinha was the one that had a couple of nice long range efforts. They do hit the bar and post a couple times here, but ultimately, I think if we kind of even it out in terms of taking their chances and making it count when it matters, Dortmund, I think, do deserve to go through. Now, I wouldn't put any other teams in the competition above Dortmund, but I would definitely say to match any other teams in terms of effort, they've done enough to get to where they are at this stage, and which is, of course, great for them to get to the final. I guess quickly, Mac, any other thoughts on the game or the PSG era that you kind of alluded to being over at this point?
I think that it's going to be interesting to see. Luis Enrique looks to be able to stay on. Again, we'll definitely preview Dortmund versus Real Madrid. We'll go in depth there prior to the final, so I definitely want to be able to make sure that we save that for then. But we're not going to spend too much time on PSG probably for the rest of this year. In all likelihood, for the next couple of years, we might be spending less time. So definitely want to chat about them. Is where this is probably it's the complete opposite of what happened with Manchester City in terms of impact, right? Where you saw the project go one way for Man City, how they were able to build up titles, eventually win a Champions League. And I would argue now they have a sustainable model for, even if Pep Guardiola will leave, a new manager comes in, for the next 10, 15 years, you see a roadmap for them being successful because they built from the bottom up. And PSG try to the opposite. They try to go from top down in football and just buy big names, buy the win in essence, going from that manner, and you see where it's gotten. Reached one Champions League final. Yes, they won a lot of French Cups. That's fantastic. No one really cares. There were people talking about if they won the Champions League, they were on for a quadruple. It's a French quadruple. No one understands it. Doesn't matter. So it's just different levels to it, and the way that they structured out their business model. Yes, financially in some aspects, maybe it was a success. But long term, is this team going to be remembered in any big way? No. And that for me is disappointing. And now they're reverting back to, okay, we need to be able to build from the bottom up. And that's why they're starting to invest more so in their youth. Again, you're PSG, you're in Paris, and you're in France. You have a wealth of footballing options in your home country to build from. Why wasn't that the initial plan? And you even had the best player of his generation, French, on that team. Why weren't you building basically the French national team for PSG instead of trying to get all these other kind of big kickstars? I understand. Again, I'm not in charge. So a lot of people there that works for the club will know more about, will forget more about football than I'll ever know. At the end of the day, we can all agree it didn't work out their favor. It has been a failure. And would I be surprised if they're just a round of 16 team getting knocked out over the next subsequent years and slowly fade into nothing? It's possible. They may not be, but this, at least Mbappe attempt at French Galacticos era is over.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if, like you said, they don't make it past too many of those knockout stages in the Champions League. And a direct comparison would be, yeah, like you said, they're in Paris, France, definitely can, essentially, they're set up to do what Bayern does in the German league and just pick the best players off of the opposing teams. Of course, a lot of people and Ligue 1 fans are not going to like that, but of course, that's what happens most of the time with the big teams. And of course, PSG maybe move on to do just that in the coming years. But at the very least, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with them in the offseason. So, Mac, let's take a quick break here. We'll be back covering some of the Premier League chat. So, stay with us, guys. Welcome back to Hustle Footy, guys. We are going to continue our podcast now, switching over our attention to the Premier League. And before we start previewing some games that are taking place this weekend, we have to talk about a game that took place on Monday. And that, of course, can't be left unsaid. Will have an impact on how we preview the upcoming match, one of the upcoming matches. But let's get straight into it. Of course, Crystal Palace handily beat Manchester United at home 4-0. I think Ten Hag may have said something along the lines of the worst performance or the worst loss that he's ever had at Manchester United, which is not unfair. We can definitely... There's a lot of options, but I think in the manner that they suffered this defeat, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with him. Of course, we have to give credit to Crystal Palace. They are fantastic, doing well in the league, fantastic form. Just unfortunate that it's coming to the end of the season where they picked that up, but their goals, the way they're able to create chances now, is a different team compared to the one that we saw at the beginning of the season. And Man U, I'm not sure how the rest of the season will play out for them. But any quick thoughts on the result that we saw on Monday, Mac?
I'm going to start positive. Palace, I think I saw the stat in terms of shot creating actions. So you shooting for yourself or you're setting up your teammate per 90, under the age of 21, Michael Olise, or is it Michel Olise? Because has he decided if he's French or is he English? It'll be very interesting. I want to be able to figure that out.
Right.
We need him to come out and talk about this. But Michael Olise is the second with 6.1 shot creating actions per 90. And that's why you see in terms of his ability to create for himself and for his teammates, it was fully highlighted in this game of why every big team across Europe is pinpointing him as maybe a next target. And Palace are going to do whatever they can to hold on to him for as long as possible or get the most amount of money possible for him, because this is a very much under Glasner, an exciting team. Eze, Olise, Mateta. Again, my dream would be to be Mateta and be able to play with these two guys. We're just looking to be able to create opportunities for me, right? So I want to be able to give credit for them. What they're able to do now in the final third is complemented of what they're able to do, at least defensively in the midfield. And it's weird to see when you're playing against Manchester United and a Wharton Hughes midfield dominating that team. It's unusual, but it's become a norm for them how well they're playing. So want to give credit to them. On the other side, I want to dance my happy dance because I saw Casemiro to Saudi League trending on Twitter, and I really enjoyed that because I think that should have happened initially. He shouldn't even gone to Manchester United. He's been a fraud for a long time. Love to see it coming out to play now. As well as, again, I do want to say that, and that's my hate, but I actually want to be a little bit light on Ten Hag. And I do think that overall, not a great performance or performance. But when you look at that lineup, when your center halves are Casemiro and Johnny Evans, and you're playing against Olise and Eze, you're going to have a rough day. It's just not meant to be. It's not in the cards. Did I learn anything from Manchester United from this game other than that if they don't have their, let's say, their 4 or 5 best players, they're utter ass? No, but I knew that already. So there's nothing new. It's all the same. And it's tough to be able to expect more, which is why it's interesting. And I don't know, do you have any other thoughts or do you want to go right into the Arsenal game?
No, let's go straight into it because I'm sure we'll touch on the preview. How that affects it.
Because that for me is where, am I expecting any different for their home game against Arsenal? No. If that is the exact same starting 11 that we do get, because Harry Maguire seems to be out, Lisandro Martinez seems to be out, Varane's out, Lindelof's out, you're not getting any support there. There is no reinforcements waiting on the wing to help solve these issues because it's not just defense. I would argue in the game against Palace, Onana didn't kind of cover himself in glory. The midfield, Kobe Manu even didn't have a great game. Probably one of his worst games playing for Manchester United thus far. Young player, but it's unfair to put the pressure on him. Again, across the board, just looking at that lineup, and I now, whenever Manchester United lose, I go back and actually watch the highlights from Mark Goldbridge and him going into the game looking at the lineup, just the absolute depression on his face is only fair. So again, going against Arsenal, I don't expect much different. The only thing that may be different, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, is because Arsenal, everything going in, if you look at form, the last matchup, Arsenal won 3-1. And ended up having to win in extra time, but we're the more dominant team throughout the course of that fixture. I think everything is pointing that Arsenal should win. So what's the case for Manchester United to at least come out and do a performance? have two different things. One, they like their manager and want to save his job. I don't see that as much likely. I'll be completely honest with you. Or the fans, because of the occasion, because you're playing against Arsenal and not wanting to win the title, you just pull a miraculous performance out of your ass that you're not accustomed to. And the occasion goes against Arsenal, where Man City have already maybe picked up a win, and now that they're, I think actually Arsenal play ahead of Man City. I forgot the order of things. Maybe you can correct me, but it's
Man City play first.
Yeah, then Arsenal are so distraught because of the result from Fulham. So it's tough for me going into this game, seeing what's the roadmap for them to be successful, noticing the injuries and noticing that they're starting 11. So I don't know. I don't mean, and again, this may come around to bite me in the ass and Arsenal end up losing or tying 1-1 or something like that. Right now, I don't see the pathway. What about you?
Yeah. If you gave me a fully fit Man U team, I could squint enough to see a potential. What happened essentially to Liverpool happened to Arsenal in this scenario, but like you said, the lineup that Man U are unfortunately gonna be forced to play with, and just the run and form that they've been, and I think they have one win from the last 5 games. Not great going into the closing periods of the season, and you don't really have anything else to fight for. What you can realistically look forward to is resting your players to maybe win a cup match against Manchester City at the end of the season. So there's no incentive really for these Man U players, other than of course to have a good game for themselves, to really come out and give us that performance that I guess Man U fans would want. Just the way that the game's gonna go, of course. Even though Man U are home, we expect Arsenal to dominate possession. Arsenal now, very much so with City on their heels, are going to likely try to run up the score. And at this point, I know Man U against Liverpool, the 7-0 result was a freak result. But this game, I would not be surprised if it gets close to that. And what I mean by that is Arsenal want to continue to imprint their dominance and at the very least put themselves up in terms of the goal difference, so that if it does come down to that, they have that that on their back pocket essentially against City when it comes down to it. Arsenal, of course, 4 wins of the last 5. They've rested their players, of course, this past week as well. Same with Manchester United, but at this point, Arsenal just look like the more time you give them off, the more they're going to be well prepared, and you know how Arteta is going to be drilling them on how to prepare for this game. They're going to exploit, of course, the mismatches that eventually are going to come through. Even though they don't have the most quickest striker, and likely Havertz is going to start, he's going to be enough to cause problems to likely Casemiro and Johnny Evans at this point. And even if you combine them into one player, I don't think they have enough to really to stop a Havertz from that's playing in this type of form this season. So other than a heavy defeat for Man U at home, I don't really see another result coming from here. Anything on that, Mac?
2 things. One, if they get beat, let's say 4-0. I don't know if that's too aggressive, too generous. 3-0. Maybe let's be a little bit nice. We'll be nice. 3-0. Does Ten Hag make it to the FA Cup final? I think that's an interesting question that's been worded around. Does he deserve to make it to the final? That's the other question. Again, I'm not asking these questions. I've just heard these questions and I think they're interesting. I can go either way with it. Don't really care. I would like to see him at least make the final, so we see what happens, because I would love for them to win, and then he comes back for another year, and the cycle of depression continues. Selfishly, that would be great content. Secondarily, if I'm Ten Hag, I would be very interested, and I think maybe I'd get out jail free card. I know this is a little bit out there, maybe a little bit too far off the field. I would start every young player. I would start the Toby Collier, the Harry Amas, Amad Diallo, every player under the age of 21. I'm benching Eriksson. I'm benching Anthony. He might be under 21. Who cares? I'm benching everybody. I don't care. I'll play people out of the position because they don't deserve to play given the most recent performance. Obviously, that would never happen. But I would try to find a way to get some positive out of a loss that is in all likelihood going to happen. If I can get the young players playing, if I can get them out on the pitch, he's had success with Mainu. Garnacho looks to be in the best run of. This is the best form of Garnacho we've seen thus far at Manchester United. Do you credit them individually of how well they've grown, or do you credit Ten Hag? I don't know. But if you're able to get more players at the pitch, and maybe of the 3 young players that start, be like, oh, this guy looked really good. Maybe that's something we could look for the future. I am helping grow these young players. I've done it with this guy, and now this guy. Very, very interesting. So that's if I'm him, selfishly, that's the card I may play. And also, maybe that lights a fire under the ass of the senior players, because if they want to play in the cup final, if they want to be able to get that next contract, because these players, when they leave Manchester United, the only options are going to be MLS or the Saudi League, because ain't nobody going to want them. So they might be, okay, now we need to earn our way back in the team. Just a thought. Probably won't happen, but something I would look at if I'm him.
Yeah, I mean, could very well happen. Could very well happen, and I'm sure. I know there's no Arsenal players currently still in the squad from that 8-2 result, probably a decade ago, but it could definitely be the other way around, and I'm sure that's something that could be in the cards. But let's go on then back to the next game we'll preview: Forest versus Chelsea. Ooh, this one's going to be a big one there for both teams, really. Chelsea, of course, chasing a great finish to the season, and an otherwise poor transition season, I would argue. Whereas Forest, of course, need kind of all the points that they can get. I think if I've heard correctly, their appeal to get their points reduction got rejected, so they're stuck at sort of where they are now, looking to get as many points as possible in their last 2 games. What do you sort of see happening in this match, Mac?
I think this is potentially a decider for both these teams in their respective races. When you're looking at Chelsea, if they win this game, there's no reason why, because they do. I think they also have that extra game in hand to finish in a European spot this year and potentially have control of themselves, of their own destiny, because a lot of the other teams around them are facing stiff competition, which Newcastle facing Brighton, and Spurs kind of in a downfall. So they may have, like I said, their destiny in their own hands. In addition, Forest, if they win this game, which I wouldn't put it too past them, because they actually won the first fixture at Stamford Bridge all the way back in September, so they know they can beat this Chelsea team. It's very much a different team now, but they should be confident going into this game. If they win this game, they should be safe, and there should be no questions going into the final match day. Selfishly, I want the Chelsea to be able to win this game. I want chaos at the end of the season. I want to be able to see that happen. But given how we've seen both of these teams have high highs and low lows, I'm very excited to see how this happens. And then the last piece is where something you brought up in our previous podcast. What if Callum Hudson-Odoi scores 2 goals against Chelsea? Like, what is the fan reaction to that game? I understand they're playing at Forest, but what do you think their reaction is? Because literally, it's Mudryk looking at, that's supposed to be Hudson-Odoi over there, no? But you paid 100 mil for him instead. So again, that's the type of chaos I want to see, and I think you would want to see. Not to speak for you too, but I think that would definitely go us into our next podcast. Very, very excited for that type of result.
Yeah, definitely. The matchups all across the pitch are going to be something to watch. Chelsea really weren't bothered too much in the last game against West Ham. Won 5-0 on the weekend, and we talked about that already. Apart from a couple of instances, I think West Ham may have hit the post once or twice that game. They weren't really troubled, but of course now we're going to see a Nottingham Forrest who have to come out and try to get a result, especially at home. And Chelsea, yes, Thiago Silva's last season, and of course at Chelsea, I think he's going to be going back to Brazil after this. So we'll see if he can give Chelsea those performances that are needed to, like you said, secure a European position next season. That I think is sort of the best send-off that he can give Chelsea. But of course, Nottingham Forest, they do have some players that can cause them problems, like you said, Callum Hudson-Odoi. Whereas, as well, even in that game against Sheffield in the last time out for Nottingham Forest, they did concede first through a penalty and could have gone down more heavily in the first half. So I think it's going to be a huge first 20 to 30 minutes in this game. Any goal there will really set the pace for both teams. And like you said, it could be a up and down game for both teams, but really, I think whoever scores first in this game, easier for me to say and predict, but that's going to really define how this game goes because we know both teams can lose in very dramatic fashion, and I wouldn't be opposed to seeing something like that happen. So that's all I have for this game. Let's move on then, Mac, to another match, Newcastle versus Brighton. Now, Brighton haven't been. I think it's gone under the radar how bad Brighton have been so far this season. You would not have expected them to finish in the bottom half of the table, and which of course they found themselves now, especially with Zerbi and how well they started to play for him last season. But of course, European commitments made it difficult for Brighton, I think, to compete on all fronts. Whereas Newcastle themselves are chasing that top 5 position, and if they get a win here, they do have an easy run in towards the end of the season, and definitely could achieve that. What are your predictions from this game, though, Mac?
I think you're spot on with Brighton. That is I would argue, the least talked about important story what's happening in Premier League at the moment. It's because they've dropped down to 11th. They're actually 4 points off of Crystal Palace. I understand Brighton have a game in hand, but a month ago we were talking Palace being in the relegation battle. So what's separating Brighton from the rest of these teams is very interesting. And there is no talk of De Zerbi being linked to any of the manager roles right now, which I think is a big conversation piece, because I would say 4 months ago, prior to Klopp leaving, he was one of the next managers up in queue where, hey, what about De Zerbi? Should he replace Ten Hag? Should he be coaching Barcelona? Again, all that still may come to pass, not to be able to disparage any of his quality, but the fact that they are sitting after 35 games on 47 points and a negative 4 goal difference, this is a very important story, because we're talking about a team that, again, like you said, a couple of months ago, we reviewed at them as potentially a European challenger. And a lot of potential young stars on the team that everyone's looking out for. If it be a Evan Ferguson, if it be a Billy Gilmore, I understand both of those are a little bit more selfish to me, but there's a lot of quality on this team that, generally speaking, can show out. But a lot of that glitter has kind of been taken off, and I think that shine has been taken off, and we may not be until a full calendar year till a lot of that's regained, because I think they really need to prove themselves. Whereas for Newcastle in this game, as you talked about, Tottenham, it's funny, as they've started to perform better, Tottenham have performed worse. So they may be the team not banking on Manchester City winning the FA Cup for them to be able to get a European position. Because if they're only right now 4 points back of them, if results continue as they may, and Spurs do have a tougher run in still for the rest of the season, and they may have a chance to be able to kind of sneak above them and finish 5th, which, if at the beginning of this year you told any Newcastle fan you finished 5th, your first year back in the Champions League, that's not a horrible year out. So again, they still have a lot to play for. But again, for me, I'm more so concerned about what's going on at Brighton. And is this just a poor 3 months, or is this who they are and who they will be next year?
Yeah, exactly. Because the way sort of the seasons were at the midway mark of the season, you would have expected Newcastle to be maybe 8th, 9th, around then. And the opposite for Brighton. You expected them full season now would have been, or close to a full season under De Zerbi. With some European pedigree now, they should be shooting up and try to secure themselves another European spot this season. Well, on the flip side, it looks like Newcastle, with those important players really performing well for them, can really drag themselves up to a European spot. And I guess very much similar to last season, where it was essentially, I think it was Spurs, Liverpool, Man U. Towards the end of the season, it's a funny thing. It's something that I noticed. All these teams who are fighting for a top 4 position end up losing games here and there. It's a battle of who doesn't want to finish in the top 4 the most. And I think pretty much set that Aston Villa will likely finish in that 4th spot. We'll definitely talk on Liverpool, Aston Villa more so, I think, in our next podcast, considering they play Monday. But those remaining spots, 5th and 6th, depending on how Man City and Man U go in the FA Cup, can still be up for grabs, and could be interesting to see what Chelsea and Newcastle are able to do if Spurs don't really rescue any type of form in their last couple of games. So still a lot to play for. Let's keep an eye on that. But I think this concludes our podcast for today, then, Mac. If you guys like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social media. So that's at @houseof_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email as well. houseoffooty@hotmail.com is our email. The next time you'll hear from us will be Monday when we review the second last match week of the Premier League. Of course, there are some games coming up next week, but this is the full second last full matchup that will take place. So until then, Mac, thank you for joining us.
Peace out.
See you guys soon.